The young heir who wasted away in his father's prison, the sound of steps came in the deep of night, soft but purposeful, circling his cell like a wolf tracking its quarry. Don Carlos snapped awake, his breath uneven, the sparse straw pallet beneath him soaked with perspiration. The blackness closed in, heavy and oppressive, pierced only by the dim flicker of a torch seeping beneath the iron-bound door. He strained to listen, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound faded, leaving only the rasp of his labored breathing. Phantoms, he told himself, or worse, his father's agents. The chill of the stone walls sank into his bones, and he clutched the tattered blanket closer, though it did little to fend off the cold. His fingers grazed the rough stone beside him, tracing the scratches he'd carved in moments of despair. A bitter metallic taste lingered in his mouth from the scant meal pushed through the door's slot hours before. Gruel, barely worthy of the name, tainted with the rust of iron. He ate it without protest, though his stomach churned. Hunger was his constant shadow now, gnawing at him like a vulture on carrion. His thoughts drifted to the life he'd lost. The grand corridors of the Alcazar, the weight of a crown never truly his, and his father's face, stern and unyielding, those sharp eyes seeing only a rival where a son should have stood. "You are no heir of mine," the words still stung, fiercer than the shackles on his wrists. A sudden clank of metal startled him. The door's viewing slot snapped open, and for a moment, eyes gleamed in the torchlight, watching, weighing. Then as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. Don Carlos exhaled, his breath a faint mist in the icy air. The steps would return, they always did, and in the silence he wondered if they were real or if the darkness had begun to speak. The halls of the Alcazar had once echoed with his laughter. Don Carlos recalled it now as the cell's cold bit into him. He'd been young, impulsive, the golden heir to an empire spanning continents. Yet even then, shadows followed him. His tutors whispered of his volatility, how his moods could shift like a tempest. One moment, he'd charm with a wit that coaxed smiles from even the grimmest courtiers. The next, his temper would flare, his voice a thunderclap that sent servants fleeing. "The prince is unwell," they muttered behind cupped hands. King Philip I heard it all, he missed nothing. Carlos could still see his father's face, pale as stone, those dark eyes ever watchful. The king had never truly held him close. Even as a boy, Carlos felt the chasm between them, the unspoken doubt. Could this boy be my ruin? The first time his father struck him, Carlos was 12. A trivial dispute over a skipped lesson, a sharp word about his mother's memory, and the king's hand had lashed out, the slap ringing through the room. "You will learn respect," Philip had growled. Carlos learned many things, but respect was not among them. By 16, his outbursts were infamous. He hurled a servant down a staircase for spilling wine on his doublet. He smashed a rare Murano glass mirror because its reflection taunted him. The court braced itself when he passed, anticipating the next storm. And his father watched, always watched. "He is unstable," Philip confided to his counsel, the words a slow poison in the ears of men who dared not contradict. A danger to himself, to Spain. Carlos knew they spoke of him. He saw how his father's gaze lingered during council meetings, as if sizing him for a noose. Then came the night that sealed his fate. Drunk on pilfered wine, Carlos had stormed into the royal chapel, shouting blasphemies that blanched the priests. He railed against his father's reign, the crushing weight of duty, the heavens that had cursed him with an unclaimed crown. The king found him there, kneeling before the altar, a penitent or a traitor. Their eyes met in the candlelight, no words needed. The shadows in Philip's gaze grew darker, and Carlos, for the first time, knew true fear. His father saw not a son, but a threat. The arrest came without warning. Don Carlos had been pacing his chambers, the weight of sleepless nights heavy on him. The air smelled of wax and damp stone, the silence broken by the distant chime of a monastery bell. Then came the boots, dozens, marching in grim rhythm down the hall. He turned as the door crashed open. Royal guards poured in, their armor glinting in the torchlight. At their head stood the Duke of Alba, his face a blank slate. "By order of His Majesty King Philip II," the Duke declared, voice flat, "you are to be placed under arrest." Carlos laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. On what charge? Treason. The word hit like a dagger. He lunged not for the guards, but for the dagger on his desk. A futile act, hands seized him, strong as iron, pinning his arms. He thrashed, spitting curses, but they forced him to his knees. "You can't do this," he snarled. "I am your prince." The Duke's expression remained unchanged. They dragged him through the palace like a thief. Courtiers shrank against the walls, their eyes wide with shock and relief. Whispers trailed him. They say he conspired with the Dutch rebels. Plotted to poison the king. Madness runs in his blood. Lies, all lies. The last face he saw before the dungeon claimed him was his father's. Philip stood at the staircase's summit, still as a statue, watching his son's descent. Their eyes locked in a final, silent exchange. No anger, no sorrow, only the cold resolve of a king erasing a mistake. The cell door slammed shut. The key turned. And Don Carlos, Prince of Asturias, heir to the Spanish Empire, was no more. In the darkness, he pressed his forehead to the icy stone floor. The whispers of treason lingered, but louder still was his father's unspoken judgment. You were never meant to wear the crown. Time lost meaning in the gloom. Don Carlos no longer knew if days or months had passed since his father's guards cast him into this stone grave. The air reeked of mildew and his own filth, a sour stench that clung to his skin. His once fine clothes had frayed into tatters, the embroidery lost in the threads. His trembling hand traced the scratches he'd clawed into the wall, a vain attempt to track time. His nails were split, crusted with blood. The stone yielded nothing. No sunlight reached him. The only light was the torch's faint glow seeping under the door, a cruel tease of a world beyond. He grew to loathe that light, its false promise. His body weakened. A fever came and went, leaving him shivering or sweating. His joints ached, his stomach a hollow void that devoured itself. The guards brought food sporadically, stale bread, spoiled meat, water tasting of rust. He ate it all, choking down the decay, knowing it was all that kept death at bay. But death was patient. At night, or what he guessed was night, rats came. Their claws scratched the stone, their squeaks mocking him. Then they grew bolder, creeping closer, their eyes glinting. He tried to kill one once, lunging with desperate rage, but they were too quick. Now he lay still, watching them steal the crumbs he couldn't reach. Perhaps they'll eat me next. The thought should have horrified him. Instead, it drew a hoarse laugh, echoing like a taunt. His mind was fraying. He dreamed of open fields, galloping horses, the throne that should have been his. But when he woke, gasping, the walls were always there, closing in. Sometimes he saw faces in the shadows. His father's cold stare, his mother's faint smile, the blurred features of a woman he might have loved. Their voices overlapped, indistinguishable from madness. One day or night, he clawed the walls until his fingers bled, screaming for freedom, for light, for anything but this endless dark. The guards ignored him. Exhausted, he collapsed, the stone cold against his cheek. Beyond these walls, Spain flourished. His father ruled. The world moved on, and here in the cell's grip, Don Carlos was already forgotten. The guards whispered when they thought no one heard. He screams like a fiend, one muttered, shifting uneasily outside the cell. The torchlight deepened the shadows under his eyes. Last night he begged for mercy or death, I couldn't tell. His companion, a grizzled veteran, grunted and made the sign of the cross. Cursed, that one. No man wails like that unless something's eating his soul. A servant girl approached with a tray of stale bread and a pitcher of water. She hesitated, glancing at the heavy door. Is it true? She whispered, voice quaking. What they say about him? The older guard frowned. Don't ask, girl. Some things are better left unknown. But the rumors spread like wildfire through the palace. In the kitchens, cooks exchanged looks as they kneaded dough. They say he tears at his own flesh, one whispered, wiping floury hands on her apron. Claims the walls are alive. In the stables, grooms shivered in the heat. Heard he speaks to spirits, a stable boy confided, soothing a skittish horse. Names them, his mother, his tutors, even the king, like they're there with him. Even the courtiers who once bowed to Don Carlos now spoke his name with pity or disgust. Madness runs in the blood, a duchess sniffed, fanning herself. His grandfather saw demons in his final days. A mercy, then, another noble murmured, that the king locked him away before he could sully the throne. But in quieter corners where loyalty was thin, some dared to question. What if he isn't mad? What if he's right? A young scribe, tasked with noting the prince's meager rations, lingered by the cell one evening. The screams had stopped, replaced by a rhythmic scraping. Against his instincts, he pressed his ear to the door. Not real, none of it, the prince's voice rasped. The crown was brittle, the throne dust. He knew, always knew. The scribe recoiled, but as he fled, the thought lingered. What if the prince saw the truth? By dawn, even that whisper faded beneath the king's silence, the guard's fears, and time's relentless march. In his cell, Don Carlos laughed, a low, broken sound at the jest only he understood. The world called him mad, but madness was the only rational answer to a world like this. The physician arrived at dusk, called by the king's rare command. Dr. Mendoza, lean with ink-stained hands and a furrowed brow, had tended nobles and beggars, but never a prisoner like this, a prince turned specter. The guards led him through the dungeon's twisting corridors, their torches casting eerie shadows on the damp walls. "Examine him," the captain muttered, "not treat him. His Majesty's orders." Mendoza nodded, though the order churned in his stomach. The cell door creaked open, and the stench hit first: sweat, infection, decay. Then he saw Don Carlos, curled like a wounded beast in the corner, his one sprout frame a skeletal shell. His matted hair clung to sunken cheeks, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes glassy with fever. "Another ghost," the prince rasped, his voice a shadow of its former self. "Or here to drain me, leech?" Mendoza knelt, setting his satchel down carefully. He didn't flinch when the prince recoiled or when a weak hand struck out. "I'm here to help, your highness," he lied. The examination was quick, methodical. Peeling back, the prince's tattered shirt revealed festering sores where chains bit into his wrists, red streaks of infection creeping up his arms. His ribs jutted like bars, his breath shallow and rattling. "He needs care," Mendoza said sharply to the guards. "Bandages, a poultice, proper food, or he won't survive the month." The captain's face didn't shift. "Our orders stand, examine, report, nothing more." Mendoza's jaw clenched. This isn't examination, it's watching a murder. A dry chuckle escaped Don Carlos. "Tell my father his physician has a bard's tongue. Will he hang you for it?" The guards shifted, one crossing himself. Mendoza hesitated, then drew a vial of lavender oil from his satchel. He uncorked it, letting the scent cut through the cell's foul air, and dabbed a drop on the prince's wrist. A futile kindness. Don Carlos inhaled sharply, his fevered eyes locking onto Mendoza's. "She wore lavender," he whispered. "My mother, did you know?" Mendoza couldn't answer. The captain cleared his throat. "Time's up." As Mendoza rose, Don Carlos gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "Tell me, do I seem mad?" Mendoza met his gaze. The truth burned in his throat. "No, your highness, you seem like a man who remembers too much." The prince's grip loosened. His laughter followed Mendoza out, echoing down the corridor as the door slammed shut. In the torchlit hall, the captain eyed him. "You'll tell His Majesty the prince is unwell, as expected. Nothing more." Mendoza nodded, rehearsing the lies he'd tell. But in his heart, a truth took root. Some illnesses weren't of the body, but of the crown itself. Hunger was a knife, hollowing him out. Don Carlos lay curled on the stone, his stomach a tight knot that stole his breath. The guards hadn't brought food in days, or had they? Time blurred into thirst and delirium. He licked his cracked lips, tasting blood. The last meal crawling with maggots he'd eaten anyway, gagging on the spoiled meat. Now even that was gone, leaving only the void within. A rustle stirred him. Rats. They slunk from the shadows, whiskers twitching, eyes glinting. He'd grown used to them, their boldness as they stole his unreachable crumbs. But now, watching them scurry, a new thought sparked, quickening his pulse. Food. The idea repelled him at first. He was a prince, heir to Spain. Eating vermin was unthinkable. But hunger eroded pride, stripping him to instinct. His fingers twitched. A bold rat crept closer, sniffing his sleeve. Holding his breath, Don Carlos lunged. His hand closed around warm fur. The rat squealed, clawing him, but he tightened his grip and snapped its neck. The sound was small, final. He stared at the limp body, revulsion churning. Then hunger roared louder than shame. The first bite was the hardest, tough flesh, metallic and gamey. His body didn't care. It demanded sustenance, and he obeyed, tearing into the rat like a starved beast. Blood smeared his chin, his hands. By the third bite, he was weeping. The other rats fled, save one, frozen by the wall. Don Carlos wiped his mouth and lunged again. This time, he didn't kill it first. The rat's shrieks filled the cell as his teeth sank into its flesh. Hot blood flooded his mouth, and he gagged but swallowed. The creature stilled. He ate until only bones remained, then collapsed, trembling, his mind adrift. "What am I?" His father's voice answered, cold and mocking. "Exactly what I always knew you were." Laughter spilled from him, raw and jagged, turning into a sob, a scream, a plea. The guards outside shifted, glancing at each other. "He's gone mad," one muttered. But Don Carlos wasn't listening. He was already waiting for the next rat. The servant girl Anna had no reason to linger near the prince's cell. Curiosity was dangerous for a servant, yet night after night, she returned to the oak door, listening. Tonight, the prince was silent. Anna pressed against the wall, twisting her apron. The torchlight cast ghostly shadows. The guards, lax in their duty, paid little mind to a man already dead in name. A faint groan came through the door. Anna's breath caught. She shouldn't be here. A whipping or worse awaited if caught. But the prince's broken voice tugged at her heart. "Water," he pleaded, barely audible. Her eyes fell to the bucket at her feet. Stale bread, a scrap of cheese, a water skin she'd stolen. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in weeks. Her hand hovered over the feeding slot. Do it. Don't. Duty clashed with pity. The king had ordered the prince starved, his spirit crushed before his body. To defy was treason. But Anna remembered the prince's reckless smile, tossing coins to beggars, sneaking sweets to kitchen children. That boy was gone, erased by the king's will. Did he deserve this? Her trembling fingers lifted the slot's cover. The cell's stench, sweat, infection, blood made her gag. She peered inside. The prince lay curled, his ribs sharp beneath his skin, chains glinting at his swollen wrists. Her throat tightened. She pushed the water skin through. It landed with a thud. He didn't move. For a moment she feared he was dead. Then his head turned, eyes fever-bright, fixed on the gift. He lurched forward, chains clanking, and seized the water skin, drinking greedily, water spilling down his chest. When he finished, he stared at it, then at the slot. Their eyes met. She saw no recognition, only desperate hope. More, he croaked. Her heart pounded. She shoved the bread and cheese through, yanking her hand back. The prince tore into the food like a beast, his ferocity startling her. Footsteps sounded behind. Anna spun. The captain stood at the corridor's end, his face unreadable. Her blood froze, he knew. She curtsied, mind racing, but he turned away, his steps fading. Anna exhaled, legs trembling. As she fled, the prince's voice followed, "Thank you." The words haunted her back to the kitchens. She swore she wouldn't return. Yet she knew she would. The fever gripped him now. Don Carlos lay on the stone, pain mapping his body, each breath a battle, each heartbeat a faint protest. The cell wavered, the walls pulsing like a beast's ribs. He couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. The darkness was alive, whispering, coiling around him. "Mother." She stood in the corner, glowing impossibly. Maria Manuela of Portugal, her face soft, kind, a faint smile. "You were always too much like me," she murmured, "too much fire for this cold court." He reached for her, but chains held him iron, biting his wrists, drawing blood. "Take me with you," he begged. Her smile faded. "Not yet, my love." She vanished, leaving the cell empty. He gasped, the vision dissolving. The fever painted new scenes, a vast throne room, the Spanish crown on a velvet cushion. His father's voice boomed. "You were never worthy." Carlos laughed, a wheezing sound. "I know," he whispered. The crown melted into gold at his feet. Another face appeared, Isabella, his betrothed, her eyes sad. She'd been a girl, a pawn in his father's schemes. He barely knew her, yet she knelt beside him, her cool fingers on his brow. "You could have been happy," she said. "Not in this world," he rasped. She leaned close. "Then close your eyes, my prince. The next will be kinder." A real creak sounded. Footsteps. Carlos turned, expecting guards, the physician, death. But it was his father. King Philip II in black velvet, his face unreadable, torchlight gilding his jaw, his silvered beard. "Come to watch me die." Carlos' breath hitched. Philip's gaze swept over his son's ruined form, sunken cheeks, festering wounds, something flickered in his eyes, regret. "Relief. You should have been stronger," the king said. Carlos coughed, blood on his lips. "And you should have been a father," the words hung like a blade. Philip turned. "Wait," Carlos rasped. "Was it ever real, any of it?" The king paused, then the door closed and darkness swallowed all. Alone, Don Carlos let his head rest on the stone. Visions returned, his mother's hand, Isabella's smile, the unclaimed crown. He closed his eyes, unafraid. The cold slowed his pulse, his thoughts. He no longer felt the chains. His body floated, weightless. The fever's fire faded to embers, leaving numbness. He exhaled, his breath a faint mist, another ghost. A bell tolled beyond, midnight, or his knell. Let it ring. He'd fought the walls, the hunger, the silence. Now there was nothing left. His father had won. Spain would forget him. A traitor, a madman, a warning whispered in courts. A fitting end for a prince who never was. A rustle stirred him. Anna knelt beside him, her face pale. She pressed a damp cloth to his brow, hands shaking. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "Neither should you," she whispered. He wanted to laugh but coughed, blood filling his mouth. Anna wiped it with her sleeve. "Do they still speak of me?" he rasped. She hesitated. "Yes, lies then. Some she admitted, but not all. I remember." His chest warmed. "What, the oranges?" she said softly. "You stole a basket, tossed them to the courtyard children, laughed when the Duchess scolded you." He'd forgot. The memory gleamed, fleeting. They were sour, he recalled. The children made faces. Anna smiled faintly. "They loved you for it." The bell tolled again. His eyelids grew heavy. The dark no longer scared him. Anna's hand found his, warm against his wasted skin. "Will you stay?" he asked. Until the end, she vowed. He closed his eyes. His final breath slipped out, soft, unburdened. In the silence, Anna wept. Beyond the cell, Spain slept. The king did not stir. The world turned, blind, uncaring. But in the dark, where none would look, a single candle flickered to life, and a prince was free at last. Thank you for watching my story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and press the bell icon. Stay tuned for more real-life stories, get more experiences.